Hello, 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 everyone. Thank you for joining the Enterprising Women of Color Fireside Chat. Our highlight of today is to meet Black women making tremendous strides in corporate philanthropy in this special edition of Black-owned series event in conjunction with the Anacostia Arts Center. So welcome. So if you're here today, give me something good. How did your day went? Is it good, fantastic? Give me something in the chat so that I know that you are here and you can hear me well before we get started. So my name is Kimberly Gale. I am the Chief Program Officer for Wake Up. I am good, thank you. I am the Chief Program Officer. I oversee many program initiatives at the Washington Area Community Investment Fund, including the Enterprising Women of Color Business Center. We provide advisory services, and most importantly, we provide capital for entrepreneurs. So if you ever need assistance with that, just let us know. But we want to get to the most important topic of today. And so I'm going to let my panel come on today so they can introduce themselves and basically talk about in a very, very, very lucrative topic to my heart is about the world of philanthropy. Many people don't understand how money moves, how it moves around, especially for organizations like community development organizations as ours, and the trickle-down effect that the cause of foundation work or how individuals in this space have sit at the table and their voice in the table and how important it is. But we get to have some of the best three women, Black women to be exact, who are in these spaces, who are really fighting the fight for us every single day. And we get an opportunity to talk to them about the philanthropy industry, trends about the industry, and their insights about what's going on in our world today. We know that corporate leaders have made tremendous commitments in these last few years due to the social unrest regarding racial injustice. And so we get to hear from them about their perspectives about how is it going and what's going on in this space. So ladies, welcome. It's just a pleasure to meet all of you. So let's start. I'll start with you, Don, to introduce yourself. Tell me a little bit about your role and what you do, who you work for, and so our audience can get to know a little bit about you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kim. Thanks so much for having me, and for the audience taking time to hear from us on your Monday evening here. So my name is Dawn Larry. I currently work for the Greater Washington Community Foundation. By way of background, I'm a California native. I've been in the District of Columbia for, I guess, over 20 years now, which is scary to say that I've lived in DC longer than I lived in California, but I still have a little bit of my West Coast flavor intact. But I live in Ward 7 and been living in Ward 7 in DC for about 20 years. And my background really was in the field of community development. And that's really where I learned about the district, learned about neighborhoods as it relates to the district, and really just stumbled into the space of philanthropy. Really, it wasn't intentional. It was really by accident, maybe a happy accident in some way. I had worked for some financial institutions before I sort of really entered in the space of philanthropy. And now, as I said, I work for a community foundation, which is a different style of foundation that has many different kinds of donors and does grant making on behalf of those different kinds of donors. Yeah, so I'll stop there and looking forward to chatting with you and my colleagues.
Yeah, we are so excited to have you here. Don's so modest, you know. So Don has done some volunteer work for Wake Up. So we appreciate all the work that she's done on our board, and her contribution has been tremendous for us. So I just wanted to put that in the bug in there, Don. So thank you so much. Chico, how about you? Let's go next.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for curating this space. My name is Chika Onwuche. I work at the Washington Area Women's Foundation, and I just started 6 months ago. So my background is actually in social work. I'm committed to community and being a resource for my community. And so one of the things I love about social work is being that resource, but in my journey, learning that, it's not always my role to be the resource. How do I sit back, listen, and learn? And also, how do I ensure that I'm working towards maybe eradicating the thing I'm working in, right? So if I'm working in the child welfare system, how do I ensure that folks no longer need to rely on these systems that have been harmful to specifically folks in my community, to be able to create and curate their own lives. And ultimately, that's kind of how I fell into philanthropy, especially at the Washington Area Women's Foundation. There was a position that was specifically focused on working with young people, young women, girls, and gender expansive folks of color, and also working with folks who were survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And so just working in pockets of communities that I had worked in previously, and being able to support that in a different lens, especially within the pandemic, which I think for a lot of direct service providers, and it's still mentally taxing. And so I love the ability to kind of transition into this other sphere that also still supports the populations that need the support. So that's me. I'm also, I think I said this, DC native. So just grateful to be working in my hometown down the street from my mother. So yeah.
All right. Well, welcome. And last but not least, Timmy, can you go ahead and share with us a little bit about you?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Timmy Bennett. I am Director of Policy at IF Foundation, and we're a private foundation based in DC, funding in the region, and we're funding, we do our work through a racial justice lens. But I'm originally from Chicago. I claim Southside. I came to DC for law school, and I've been here since 2006. So I claim both cities. I did not intentionally get in philanthropy either. I grew up in this, from the South Side of Chicago, grew up in this pro-Black Pan-African community, went to this pro-Black private school created by Baba Hakeem Madhubuti, who was a Black nationalist. I don't know if folks know, the Black Panthers created schools in the 60s and the Black nationalists were creating schools in the 70s and 80s. And so I always say, a friend of mine, I'm kinfolk, right? So I have a friend, we always say when we're talking about Black folks, are they Black in their head and their heart? And so
Right.
I'm Black in my head and my heart. I'm rooting for everybody Black all the time.
Yeah.
And so
everybody Black, love it.
Right? So I got into the advocacy space I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I also chartered the DC chapter of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women. And so always rooting for everybody Black, especially Black women. And so I was doing advocacy, as a member of DST, we would do, it's called Delta Days on the nation's capital, DDNC. And, advocacy at the national level is cool, but when it came to local politics and when we would do our local legislative days, both in with Delta Sigma Theta or with National Coalition of 100 Black Women, it just really resonated with me. It felt so tangible. I felt like we could move things. We were testifying. We were really involved in the political process. So I got into local government. I ended up working for 2 council members at DC Council, and that's how I met my boss, Yannick Redwood, who is the president and CEO of IF Foundation. And, she wanted me to discuss racial equity legislation. This is 2018. And, you have these half-an-hour conversations, but we ended up rapping for 2 hours about her. And I developed a strategy for them on who they should be approaching, who would be supportive, who wouldn't, and best next steps. And then a few months later, she's like, yo, are you looking? So she's like, I can't get you out of my mind. I'm creating this director of policy position, and I just want to know if you're interested. And I was interested. And so since then, I've built out a government portfolio within the foundation and really pushing government and local coalitions and in the advocacy space around racial equity and racial justice.
Which is awesome. And I love the fact there's some room for everybody Black. I just can't even with a word. And you know, advocacy, what I'm hearing a lot of you say already is that the work that it takes for advocacy and really being in the trenches, right? It's a difference to when you're sitting on the outside and say, yeah, we need to do this. You know, oftentimes people are like, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do that. And then the question then becomes where you are on the line, where you're making sure those things are trickled down to the actually actionable items and different steps. And I think all three of you are in positions that can see that actually physically happen from top to bottom. And so that's what makes your particular roles very and crucial and important. So let's just get to it. How and what is it like just to be a Black woman working in philanthropy in particularly, right? Because most of these foundations and most of these organizations sometimes are not led by people of color. So let's just get into it. So how is it as you as an individual, as a Black woman, being a woman and also being a Black individual in these spaces? Anybody go?
I can start, I guess. So like I said, I'm a little newer to the space. And because our foundation is a little smaller, the Washington Area Women's Foundation, it's a little smaller. All of the folks on our staff identify as women. In a lot of ways, in our staff meetings, we're having conversations about some of the issues and topics that, you know, relate to our experiences. I think one thing that has been difficult for me to grapple with is the idea of ensuring that we are authentic in advocating for the folks that we are advocating for, right? In a lot of ways, the money that is coming into maybe the space doesn't come from folks who know a whole heck of a lot about who they're giving their money to. And oftentimes, you know, it's not, I wouldn't say oftentimes, I'm gonna say in a lot of ways, it's not always from the kindness of their heart, right? So it's because we have to. And so how do we ensure that the money is going to folks in an authentic way, but also the folks that are most impacted are the ones making the decisions about where the money should and should not go. And that's something I really am hopeful that the philanthropy space can start to mirror, making sure the folks that are most impacted are the decision makers about where the money goes. And I think in a lot of ways, we have a lot of those experiences, but what does it say when we're actually engaging with our community for them to make those decisions moving forward? And so that's something that I'm learning and listening around, but also something I've noticed as I've done this work.
Absolutely. It's about that equitable distribution, right? And so how do you sit at the table or discuss, is this an equitable decision that we're making? So I can imagine that being tough in that space.
Yeah, I'll say, you know, we're a bit of an anomaly because we have a Black woman president and CEO. Our board is BIPOC, our staff is BIPOC, and actually all women too. And so although we're a small foundation, we say we punch above our weight. And for us, and like it was our 2018 staff retreat. And so centering lived experience, right? And the folks closest to the problem has always been a value and at our core, but also this idea of like being a place for community and pipelining community into philanthropy was important to us. And also acknowledging that this work, racial equity and racial justice work for Black folks is traumatizing, right? So how could we also be a place of healing for community, but then also be a place of healing for ourselves? And so we hired a healing justice associate. We onboarded, and so under Yannick Redwood's leadership, we really transformed the organization. And so we've onboarded 4 community members to our board. They get paid a stipend to serve on our board. Awesome. We also did foundation learning days where we're like just trying to do popular education around philanthropy itself. What is philanthropy? What does it mean to be on a board? What are fiduciary responsibilities, and what other opportunities are there for our community members, especially the folks with lived experience that want to plug in, and how can we be supportive and help them in that? And then also interrogating, like I just said, like, so we're different in that, like the staff, we all are like BIPOC folks, but we're still an American institution, right? And so we still have to grapple with white supremacy culture, right? Even within an organization made up of BIPOC folks. And so we've been interrogating white supremacy culture, white dominant culture within our organization organization for about 4 years now, right?
Okay.
And how that showed up in ways that we've adopted the nap ministry, right? So we take naps, we're there for each other in the way that we've done. We really look at our work to figure out I don't know if folks know, like zones of genius, zones of excellence, zones of competence, and zones of incompetence. But how do we make it so that 80% of our work that we do is within our zones of genius and our zones of excellence, right? Like this is the work that this is like passion work, right? Everybody in this space, for the most part, is passion work, especially if you're Black and you're fighting for racial equity, racial justice. Like you're not just doing it for the check, you're doing it for your people, right? And so how do you make sure that the work that you're doing is what you actually enjoy, and making sure that it was like the majority of your work was spent, majority of your time at work was spent doing that work. We also did, we do staff retreats. We went to Jamaica for a staff retreat.
Awesome.
We really try to figure out how to be happy, even though this is traumatizing work. How can we show up healthy and happy ourselves so that we can be healthy and happy for the communities that we're serving?
Awesome. Just awesome. It sounds like you work for a great organization that really, really, truly believe in the mission of what they're doing. Dawn?
Yeah, I should let Timmy go next. I shouldn't have gone last. What I want to, Timmy said that, if is an anomaly and they are a model. I just want to sort of lift that up in terms of the under Unique's leadership, just sort of quietly instigating and in doing that work, and just sort of helping the larger philanthropic landscape demonstrate to the larger philanthropic landscape how to make those shifts, right? And I will say that a lot of our philanthropic institutions are not there. There are some foundations that have also been making progress, and that's been taking a period of years and really being intentional around that. There are some of us who are further along than others, right? And so something that came up for me was that, this is it is a constant fight. And it also, what is a contributing factor is the kind of philanthropic institution you are, in terms of who then you are engaging in order to try to turn that ship. So if you are a private foundation, you are engaging a board. That is and not saying that is an easy thing, just saying that is one body that you are engaging to say, we need to be doing things differently, building their knowledge, having them do their own work about, bias showing up, racial equity, doing that learning, so that as you are guiding and directing and saying, this is where we need to shift, they are coming with you, right? As a community foundation, we have, I would just say, attention, and that is attention about who our donor base is, right? So we are an institution that does grant making on behalf of, and we get fees for doing that on behalf of, right? So that's a part of our business model. I always say that we are an institution that has to raise money to grant money. Well, that's a little different. So now we're dealing with, how do you shift and have this conversation and move government, which we know that it is a fight as it relates to in general, but even as the tool of grant making, how they see grant making. When you talk about like a corporation, or you talk about a larger foundation that maybe has different values or is not sort of plugged into the local scene and what's really going on the ground as it relates to this region, DC specifically, or the Greater Washington region. And so then it's sort of engage or individual donors, right? And then there's that. So there is a constant negotiation, fight, advocacy, educating about not only the issues, but what grant making really should be and how it really should be. It's a tool and how it should be deployed. It's real. So I come from, I always feel like Timmy Dip, you should go on last because that there is the hope that there are those institutions that have turned that ship and are leading that way and just guiding and saying, come with us as we are walking down this path, which is encouraging. But some of us are kind of working in different spaces and trying to, one, learn from those foundations and then bring our different pockets of stakeholders along, which is really a different negotiation. And I hate to use the word fight. I was trying to use a different word, but
listen, it is what it is.
It
really is, right?
It is a fight.
So it
Right.
is a fight.
It is a
It
fight.
is a fight. And I think
It's a fight. It is.
Don, you're so on point with it because I don't people understand that it's got to be exhausting, right? You know, as we talk about, you know, the health of Black women and who we are when we're in these types of spaces. And every day you have to really be strategic in what you say, how you move, how you have conversations, being gentle, presenting to the board, you know, having those conversations, directing where dollars should go, being an advocate every single day has to at some point be exhausting sometimes. Like you just want to say, you know what, I don't know if I want to stay in this place. And I don't know how long I can take the rejections and the no's and all of that kind of stuff and how difficult it could be. And I say this for personal business, sitting on the other side of being in a nonprofit space for many, many industries. And when I first got into where I was leading an organization, I didn't understand philanthropy dollars or how a culture in a state of where and how money flow to nonprofits. And I think in general, a lot of people don't understand. I don't know how they think just money just appear. They just appear and you just get it, you get it, and you get it. And they just think nonprofits is just living a life and a dream and all this other stuff. And they don't understand that it's people sitting around determining how much you get and how much you don't get, or who says yes and who says no. So the pressure is so strong that people don't understand, and nonprofit executives has to face that type of pressure of knowing who they can get funds from and who they can't get funds on. And you all being able to sit at the table to voice and to be advocates for that is crucially important. And I think a lot of people don't take that on. So where do you guys think the future really holds for Black women in philanthropy? Is it room for more? Are we behind the 8 ball? Is this something that you think that we need to really just start to pick up? How do we get more Black women in this space?
Well, one, I was going to say that I think there are, it's kind of related to your question. I think there are different models of giving that are being lifted up. Giving circles led by Black people, Black women, or Black people in general. Different ways individual Black folks are coming together to say, how can we pool our resources and invest in communities, the challenges, the issues, where we want to invest. So one, I think that is creating different spaces for Black women to enter in the giving space. Because I think philanthropy, for many reasons, when we're talking about where wealth is coming from and administering that wealth as a Black person, there is it's not necessarily an attractive prospect for a lot of Black women to enter a space where they're negotiating that, right? So I'm administering this wealth. And then if you are having to deal with some of the challenges of understanding for that donor, understanding where their wealth is coming from, how they are perpetuating that whole prospect, it's not an attractive prospect to want to enter into this space. And I do think there's real energy around these different giving circles and models that are rising up, and folks are saying, rather than me entering the field of philanthropy, let's reimagine what we're talking about as it relates to philanthropy and create our own tables about what that looks like.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah, I'll just add on to what Dawn just said about like Black women in particular have always been given. I think we are the most philanthropic, even though what we're doing is not necessarily called philanthropy, right? Traditional philanthropy. And so by like even locally, like, you know, there is Black benefactors or Young Black and Giving Black, both led by two Black women, right? Who aren't necessarily traditional philanthropy. These are Black folks that came together and are giving, right? And so when you do, and we all do, we just talked about our own institutions, but by and large, the sector is white, right? By and large, the sector is white wealth with white folk leading that wealth. And so, of course, there's not enough in the field, like just by that number, I mean, by that statement itself, no, it's not enough in the sector, right? And we do, and it is very much more, we talked to like, we talked about our organizations being a little bit different, right? Trying to do things differently, but by and large, we're not the norm. And so we do need the sector to change. We do, and it's you know, institutions are institutions because they don't change, right? Like they've stayed that way for forever. They've built like over time, they become, and you become an institution when you're just like not changing. And so by and large, change moves very slowly in the sector. And so in answer to your question, as far as like Black women, and no, it's not enough of us and we need more.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think also beyond representation of Black women, just thinking about the philanthropy space and thinking about liberation, thinking about how, I mean, Donnie mentioned it, reimagining the field of philanthropy where we're not relying on a benefactor for our resources, right? What does it look like when we're actually working towards the end of philanthropy and the need for philanthropy because we have the resources in our community? And I think the Black community does that well. I mean, both of you mentioned it, the way we give in our time, the way we give in our effort, the plenty of resources we have that are just monetary. I think is something that Black women really do bring to the space, and innovation in a way that is necessary for the folks that need it most. So that's kind of how I feel like Black women do and have contributed to the space, and I'm hoping for more of that.
Yeah, so would you say, Chica, there's a lot of collaboration amongst Black women in this space, and have you seen improvements at least in that area?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'm like I said, I'm a little newer. And one of the first things I did that was suggested to me by one of my supervisors at the Women's Foundation is to really connect with folks that are already in the space. So one of the first things, maybe the first week or so, I emailed Don, I emailed a couple other folks in the philanthropy space. And I really wanted to know, you know, what does your experience look like? And also, where do you see the field of philanthropy going? How can we contribute to this space? And I would say in that sense, you know, since then I have emailed Don a couple times about one or the other things. And I feel like because the Black community, Black women specifically, are amazing at collaboration. I've been able to lean on folks, whether it's about a specific area that we want to start thinking about or growing in a specific field, or maybe expanding our participatory grant making process, which allows for community members to engage in the grant making process. I've been able to personally benefit from, you know, the Black women that have been in this space a little longer, in terms of their experiences. And so, yeah.
That's an awesome feeling to know that you have other people on your side that really understands the space. Don, with your experience though, what have probably been maybe the most disappointing aspect of being in the, you know, in this space, in the industry? What would you say maybe?
I get the depressing question.
No, I'm just, so we're working together, but I know you got some tea that that really just like if they only knew. But what would you say the most disappointing thing would be?
So I think I sort of spoke about earlier as it relates to the fight and the negotiation. I will. On the positive side, and then I'll say on the needing improvement side, I would echo what Chica lifted up in terms of the level of community and sharing and reaching out to other colleagues, Black women in the space, there hasn't been, in my experience, people I've reached out to where there's been a pushback about, no, I don't want to talk to you, or no, I don't have time, or there's an openness in learning from one another. And one I would attribute to not only it being kind of our sense of community as Black women, but also as it relates to this field of philanthropy in this region. We are a very small sector in terms of foundations and vehicles that are supporting organizations in DC, suburban Maryland, and Northern Virginia. And so we're often having to partner with each other's resources to maximize in order to help support the work that's going on. So I think that's a benefit and an overall positive. I think where I was probably surprised at in entering this space was the level of hierarchy, or the level of I'm using hierarchy, but there's also there is a siloed spirit in this space that can exist, where we kind of, where we do the Washington, I call it the Washington, DC politeness when we're in meetings, but then, we're not really like.
It's all the show. Come on, talk to me, Dawn.
Reaching out, or
Yeah.
a little being catty.
Oh, I'll call you on Monday.
Competitive when we really don't need to be, or trying to show each other up if, someone's leading with this initiative and it's like, oh, well, that foundation is leading with that. How can we lead with this? I think over my tenure in philanthropy, and saying that broadly, and just being in different spaces, I think that is something that was a disappointing attribute about the field, that I don't think when I entered it, I didn't for some reason, I think I didn't connect that would exist. And now reality is we're just like every other industry. Like, we're not, wherever it shows up, it would show up in philanthropy. But for some reason at the time that didn't connect for me. So that makes sense. I would just think that was something that was disappointing, in addition to what I mentioned about sort of the fight.
Yeah. Speaking of the fight, do you all have any statistical data or information? I know that, one of the things I often think about is, all of those, commitments, foundation, corporate philanthropy commitments that was put out there to help, Blacks in different capacities, whether it was bridging the wealth gap, or entrepreneurship, or other forms of doing more. Have we seen any improvements since those commitments were laid out? And have we gotten too comfortable by not putting our corporate leaders accountable for what they committed to? Any stats on, or what have you seen or heard, is that was it all talk? Was it all smoke? Did we see something just because it was an emotional period? It seems like from the social unrest to the pandemic, and now we got war coming up. How do we know that these commitments from these corporate dollars or donors, or who really wanted to put us in the light, is it really happening? Or we're just really in this make-believe world where people just said what they had to say at the moment to keep us quiet?
I'll just say, I know that NCRP, which is like kind of the watchdog for the sector, recently came out with a report, and they said even with all of the promises, right, and statements that everybody was making around racial justice and racial equity, there is still a $2 billion giving gap to Black communities.
Excuse me, to stop right there. Let's repeat that.
$2 billion giving gap.
$2 billion.
Yes. And so I guess for me, the most disappointing, right, is the anti-Blackness, right? Within the sector, but then also like nobody, I mean, at the end of the day, nobody's trying to give up power, right? Like power corrupts, you know, what is it? Absolutely. All the time. And I think that Chika talked about like the sector in and of itself, like existing, like if we actually did what we said we were doing, the sector wouldn't exist. And people are not in the business of like going out of business. Like if you look at the history of philanthropy, and like, I mean, it literally was created to protect white wealth, right? And give tax benefits. And that white wealth came from the extraction from Black folks specifically, right? And when you're talking about, and then they give back a little bit percentage of that wealth, right? And but all that does is help them. It's in their interest to do that, right? And to keep that status. And so they're like, at the end of the day, it's all rooted in anti-Blackness. And on top of that, even when you're trying to say you're trying to do the work, right? Or you're trying to do racial equity, racial justice, there's this like, it's like, is that the, like, that's the moment we're in? Okay, we're going to do that for a year or two. And then we're going to shift. And now we're focused on something else over here. Now that's the big thing. And then like, and so we're constantly, but we never want to sit with anti-Blackness. We never just want to sit with racial justice. We never just want to sit with racial equity. We want to move, and we want to move as quickly as possible, because I definitely don't want to talk about Blackness, right? So let's say people of color. When we need Black people, let's do all these other things. Let's say, what about everybody else when we're talking about Blackness? Yeah. And so for me, it's the anti-Blackness, and it's the inability to actually analyze power, right? Like people don't even want to power, like let them, like everybody wants to continue gatekeeping, but nobody even wants to know like what is power? Like, can we have a power analysis? Can we talk about racialized capitalism, right? Can we talk about money? I'll say we have a reparations project that we're working on, and it's for the sector, right? Because we acknowledge we are, this is the first time in our strategic plan where we came out and said that African Americans are owed reparations, right? And we do want to put pressure on government, because we think government owes reparations, but we also think the sector owes reparations too. And we want to acknowledge the glass house that the sector is in, right? And so we want to study the endowments of foundations in the region, and to learn like how to like develop that methodology to say how much of your wealth is extracted specifically from Black folks, and then actually repair. And do you know how many people are signing up for this study? Yes, it's nobody. Exactly. And so, and I feel like people, because everybody wants to navel gaze, right? They want, oh yeah, you can study the endowment, right? But when we're talking about that commitment to pay reparations, right? When we're talking about like your wealth is owed to Black folks, nobody wants to commit to that repair.
So what do you think our responsibility as civilians, as Black civilians, into this space, right? Because when you think about the other side, about how we utilize the wealth we do have and how we provide, you know, I don't hear a lot of people in my family talking about, oh, I'm gonna create an endowment, or you take my life insurance money and put an endowment to a foundation that's gonna give kids scholarship, or, you know, do those kinds of things, you know. It's important to understand, you know. I look at people, I'm from Akron, Ohio, and I'm a proud fan of LeBron James, but not really because he plays basketball. Because I know that in the city that I grew up with is that he's sending all those kids who went through his school to college for free. That's what I'm most proud of, the things that he does off the court into this community. And he's turning a big center into a community center. That's what I'm most proud of. He can play basketball all day long, but I know what it's like growing up in a city where, you know, you didn't have those opportunities before. And so how he's using his wealth is, you know, very admirable, that most people, you know, forget, oh, is he better than Michael Jordan, that kind of crap. I don't care nothing about all that. I like the fact that he comes back to the community and he actually makes some impact and changes in the community. So on the civilian side, what would you tell individuals on the other side of the coin about how we could do more and how we could do better?
I think that's a really good question. So I'm just throwing in, this is my background in social work. I think a lot of times we quantify, or we see value in what the larger society sees value in. And it's always a white supremacist notion. So money, right, is something that we value and we love, right? Without recognizing the time, the effort, the energy, the support that folks are already pouring in, right? And so I think beyond, monetary donations, which we love, I am a proud benefactor of folks who have poured into me, not only with their time, but also their resources as well, monetary resources as well. How do we see value in pouring into communities, young people specifically, because my bias is also young people as decision makers. How do we see value in pouring into young people in a tangible way, right? And I think for me, that means providing space where we're working alongside and having them be decision makers about specific policies. So right now, if you're in DC, we do have the DC Girls Coalition, which is a community of youth servant organizations that support young women, girls, and gender expansive young people of color. And the young people actually get to make decisions about policies and advocate for those policies within their communities, within DC specifically. And so working alongside of institutions that really do center folks who, are most and deeply impacted by these experiences are a way that we can actually get the change that I feel like we need, right? So that's something that I would say. I don't think, that's a really, really good question. I think, especially in the pandemic, especially with all the experiences that Black people have that we go through, just being able to get up the next day in a lot of ways is a form of resistance. It shows the resilience that we already have. And in a lot of ways, that is the fight that people continue to have every single day. So I guess beyond existing and surviving, pouring into folks in your community, specifically for me, young people in communities, in a way that allows them to authentically be themselves. So yeah.
I think, Chika, with some things that you were saying, and I think even when Timmy was talking about some of the practices IF is doing just in terms of care for staff, just want to echo that in response to your question, Kim, because I do think self-care as Black women is a necessity and is resistance. I just want to build on what both the Black women on this panel have just highlighted in different ways that we don't talk about. We talk about doing things, right? We talk about activities, and not saying that those activities and those things are not important. They are. But what's happening is that we are tired and we are worn. It's impacting our health. It's impacting how we show up as partners or mothers, caregivers, and the other parts of ourself that's not work, right? That we're not feeding or nurturing. And I think that is important, especially now, just when we talk about sort of the African-American woman, Miss America, who committed suicide. And then there was just a conversation on a group chat I was on, and folks were just Black women, and we were just like, this is enough. Like, we are at our wits' end, and we need to see this self-care and finding ways of feeding other parts of ourselves and resting and napping and reading and thought and all those other things as just as critical as the fight. It is the fight, right? Caring for ourselves is the fight. So I would just really want to highlight that, especially in this moment now, and just build on what both Chika and Timmy have just lifted up, because that I think we don't talk enough about as Black women and as Black people.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I feel like for me, so I don't have any rules either. For me, it's do no harm. That's the only rule I would say for Black folks. Like you can't be out here stripping Black, like advocating and fighting for the stripping of Black folks' voting rights, right? Which we see happening, right? Like, so for me, it's do no harm to the collective, right? But there's a study like the John Henryism study where it's if you're a Black person and you're fighting, right, to, you know, to be successful, right, which is in America is to acquire things, right? So if you're acquiring things and you're successful, like those Black folks die younger, right? Because they've been weathered because they're out here fighting, actively fighting all these microaggressions and all these macroaggressions. And so they die younger, right? But, or if you're a Black person that's not necessarily fighting and like maybe you like you're fine with not having a lot of money, you're fine with not having a lot of power or acquiring success in this country, you live longer. And so you're like, either decision is right. To me, for Black folks, whatever you decide to do, that is the right decision. But do no harm.
Do no harm. And Don, I hear what you say. You know, I moved to the DMV area recently, and I was in all this stuff. I was a National Coalition 100 Black Women. I was on a couple of boards, just bored with just serving, and serving. And so I took a little break. This is my sabbatical. It was a shift and a change. I don't know what to do with myself. It is so hard to not be a person of service at this point, but I realized I needed to be of service to myself. And it's been really hard because I'm so busy, used to doing stuff, like being, you know, doing things and running and ripping. So thanks for the words of encouragement. We're going to open it up for any questions that you may have. Please put it either in the Q&A section or the chat. And then maybe there's any questions to deep dive that you have for one of the ladies. I wanted to take that, make sure I gave the proper time allotted for that. If there's anyone that have any questions. Okay, here's one. Thank you all for sharing so transparently today. I appreciate your insights and experience in philanthropy. Please share your organization's pro-Black agenda. Anybody want to answer, or if there is one?
I can go. We've actually just did a transformation as an organization, and with that, we have a new name. So we were formerly Consumer Health Foundation, and now we are IF. But I can read for you our new vision, right? Our vision statement is that Black people and people of the global majority live powerfully, abundantly, and beautifully in healthy, self-determined communities, free of social, economic, and ideological violence. And the way that we are doing this work is, so formally, I don't know if folks know our history, but Consumer Health Foundation was created in 1995 after the sale of the assets of the HMO. And so like this HMO was, it was a Black and Jewish neighborhood in DC that came together in the 1920s and said that everybody should have access to healthcare. And so when then it became it was a precursor to HMO at the time, and then it became an HMO, and they sold that. And so when they sold those assets, we're a $30 million endowment, and racial equity was always central to the work, right? Because we even started with racial equity in mind. And so we were doing our work. Initially, those initial grants were all focused on access and like direct services work. And then there was a shift for everything around advocacy, because we were hearing from community that philanthropy had a role. They could be at the table advocating too, right? And so we did our work. It was a health equity lens. It was health. If you were doing health equity or economic justice work through a racial equity lens, then you could get funding from us. And with this new strategic plan, when we said we wanted to center Blackness, right? When we said we wanted to center community voice, and like now our portfolio is 100% participatory grant making. We have community members on our board. We are centering healing justice as an organization internally, but then also having healing justice labs for community in the region, right? We felt that we were no longer Consumer Health Foundation. And so we shifted our priorities. We shifted from racial equity to a racial justice lens. We felt like justice was different from equity, because when it's equity, it's based on needs, but a lot of times people feel like, well, I woke up in the world and it's inequitable, so I'm helping and it's good for me, right? It's not necessarily a duty, right? But if it's justice, then you're going to acknowledge that intentional harm that happened, right? And you have a duty to repair it before we can get to healing. And so that we wanted that justice lens because we wanted that acknowledgement of the intentional harm. We wanted the repair of it. And before we could say, because we said we wanted to get to a place of healing and we felt like we needed justice before we could get to a place of healing. And so we focus on community. We have 5 pillars. It's community power, which again is our participatory grant making. It's our healing justice portfolio. It's our systems change, which is all the government work that we've been doing in the region around racial equity legislation and supporting the chief equity officers in the region. And then it's healing justice. Did I say healing justice? And then culture, which is our narrative work, right? So that storytelling and shifting the narrative and enabling Black folks and BIPOC communities to have a voice in the narrative that they're telling themselves, empowering that voice.
And Timmy,
so
if you could put your information in the, I was gonna say.
I'll put my website and I'll also put our strategic plan, which I encourage folks to check out because it's super powerful and it enabled us to feel like we could change, right? Like we didn't need to be Consumer Health Foundation acknowledging that name no longer suited us. And so if really was born out of like, what if philanthropy did what they said they were gonna do? What if we actually address root causes? So I'll put our website in the chat.
Awesome. I'll just say real briefly that, again, I always looked up about Community Foundation model being different. Yeah. So Community Foundation is sort of has identified for its discretionary resources. That means resources at its own discretion, right? And then there is a model by which how to increase those discretionary resources, but will focus on addressing the racial wealth gap. And so building that out, what does that strategy look like? What are the resources around that look like is it's sort of embarking on a plan to really unpack that and focus on what are the strategies, how will we do that as a community foundation, how will we raise dollars that's focused on that. But I would say that sort of encompasses or is a part of our Black agenda as it relates to the Community Foundation.
Thank you. Chica, did you want to add?
Yeah, sure, I will. And so our mission is specifically a community foundation that invests in women and girls of color, specifically in the region, and ensuring that we are making sure that we support the organizations and also the populations that don't get enough support, specifically survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, which, believe it or not, don't get the resources in a way that other communities do, right? And I think one of the reasons and one of the reasons why we did that was as a result of the unrest, right? So making sure that we are naming those populations that are particularly marginalized and not talked enough about. And so survivors in the safety space is something that we are focusing on and expanding the way we support Black women specifically in those spaces because they are disproportionately, they disproportionately make up the number of survivors in this specific region as well. So that's one of the ways, and we are expanding that specifically this year in how we talk about just survivors and supporting survivors in this space.
Awesome. So Chica, please put your website in the chat as well, and Don as well. We only have a few minutes left, and so if we can quickly answer just one more question was, what's the key tips when just starting a new philanthropy program? Anyone give any insights on that?
I would just say, so I'll borrow what Timmy said. 1, do no harm. 2, I would say really try to unpack what problem are you trying to solve. and really kind of try to understand, listen and learn as you're trying to answer that question about what problem you're trying to solve, where are resources needing or lacking, who's currently giving in those spaces or with those organizations or with those individuals, and how can your philanthropic effort complement or fill a gap that is not being addressed.
Awesome. And then one more is, what do you think your views are on what companies should be doing with their philanthropic dollars? Where do you think they should be directing at this day and time? Any thoughts about that? Where you think companies should be utilizing their funds to?
One thing I mean, that's a really great question, Kim. I think, so it's hard because I think individuals, and we don't realize this enough in the philanthropy space, or maybe we do, we don't live singular live issues, right? Like there are so many issues that encompass and make up who we are as a person. And so it's always interesting to me that we want to figure out, and Timmy talked a little bit about this. It's like, well, where's our energy? What is everyone talking about now? And how do we devote money to that right now?
It's whatever's hot.
Yeah. And to me, the better question is, systemically, how can we eradicate some of these issues so that we are no longer focusing on this one issue? And I think focusing on racial justice or focusing on systems change is a better way in framing how we really can lift up these populations and really change this fear. So that's kind of what my answer has been in the past couple just years of actually doing this work. So I can't give, I don't know. Maybe Don and Timmy can.
Yeah, it's a hard sphere with companies to do. So we're at our time, and so just a few seconds just to answer this question. So anyway, out each one of you, what I wish you knew, and then I want you to finish that sentence. So anybody could start. What I wish you knew to our audience is what? Good takeaway. What I wish you knew, whatever is in this space, in this industry, but what I wish you knew. They all like,
I guess I can start, and I can be a little personal to this, my lived experience. I wish I knew I didn't have to take out thousands of dollars in debt to go to school and do, like, I feel like that's over my head, but it's also like I can serve my community without having to be validated by institutions that don't necessarily translate into what I necessarily feel like is my role or my commitment to my community. So that's personally what I wish I knew about just space and just being in community.
thanks, Chica. What I wish.
I'm gonna let the powerhouse go last. So Timmy going like,
she gonna take us home. She gonna take us
Timmy
home.
gonna take us home.
And then
Right.
we're gonna be up all night because we're gonna be
Right,
thinking about
right.
what she said, right? She's like, oh man.
Timmy's
I
gonna
can't
take us
sleep.
home, and we're gonna be the amen corner. So I'm gonna take it on a personal note too. Maybe it's just because of where I'm at now in my journey, is that I wish I knew how important and valuable I am, how my whole person is important and valuable, and I'm more than just a worker. Like, I wish I knew that. I'm recognizing that more. I'm celebrating that more, creating boundaries to protect her, that part of me, nurture that part of me more. But I wish I knew that earlier on in my life.
Thank you. Timmy, take us home. I wish I knew.
Now set me up. Honestly, I'm really into history. I'm a unaccredited historian, but I feel like I wish I knew how intertwined capitalism was with racism, right? I feel like people act like they're two separate things. and they're not. And if we're going to be talking about money, you cannot talk about money without talking about racism and the extraction of wealth, right? And I think that in America, like that's all we're so focused on success and getting things and acquiring things and not acknowledging that when you're acquiring stuff, it's a taking, right? And so I'm fine with the extraction so long as it's coming from white wealth. And so how do we, you know, because that was stolen and that's not theirs anyway, right? And so let's be intentional about if we're trying to gain, right, let's not gain it from ourselves. Like let's not again do no harm, and let's be intentional about taking it where it actually should be taken from, which is white wealth and power.
On that note, Timmy brought, did she bring us home or what? Did she do it?
You brought it home.
She did it. She did it. A word. I hear that. Thanks so much. This was great. Awesome question responsive. Thank you for sharing. So yes, thank you all for attending our event tonight. And again, I want to say to you all, my appreciation for the work that you do every day and the advocacy that you do to share work and to make sure that there's equitable access for all of us. And so I just want to say we appreciate you on this last day, but we Black every day. So, you know, keep on rising. We're going to rise up. We're going to be Black tomorrow as well. But, you know, anyway, good work. And we really appreciate you all for taking the time to discuss this today. So thank you and have a good evening. Thank you so much, ladies.
Bye. Good night, y'all.
Bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Night.
Good night.